Just to go back to what you asked me was, I want athletes to be able to pattern in all nasal breathing at rest during the day and the night. Then what biomechanically, how should the breath look? It should, yes, the belly should rise, followed by the chest. Then your exhale should let go. So if you listen to what I do here, so that was a breath that was in through my nose and out of my mouth. As I inhaled through the nose, my belly rose, then my chest rose. As I exhaled, it was just recoiled. It just fell out of my mouth with an open jaw. And you would be amazed the amount of athletes who can't do that.
That was performance coach and breathing specialist Leo Ryan. You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast. Thanks for being here today. So breathing is one of those things that critically important. You have to do it to live. You do it a lot, 20,000 breaths a day. It just might not be one of those things that, especially for those of you listening, and many are, I know, who are very attuned to speed and power outcomes, reactivity outcomes, and things that we see on that end of things on the field of play. It may not be then quite as a quantitative thing as you put 5 inches on your vertical by doing a French contrast program, or you increased your speed through oscillatory isometrics, or these things. It's in that sense, it might be a little more subtle. But from an energetic perspective and a mental clarity perspective, it is a very big rock and very apparent. And breathing has the ability to massively impact these areas. That's what this show is all about. It's hard to really do justice to the athletic body, human performance, if we don't cover the full spectrum. Breathing is a topic that I haven't dove into nearly enough. And it controls so many things, from our recovery between bouts and sets of sprints or sprint endurance, or game movements and recovering our energy, to recovering from training session to training session, how our body adapts and what type of state we're in. Are we in a recovery state? How well are we putting energy back in the cell? To our mental state, and which there is a profound impact between breathing and mental state and performance state. And I wanted to do a podcast that really, for me, I like just hearing things. I'm always intrigued. Like, I see people running with their mouth taped, or I've done lots of different breathing techniques myself. But I always want to know more about the why, the mechanics, and hear about it from someone who's really been through it all and has synthesized the common themes of each technique and what are we doing and what's going on here. Again, breathing, it can really transform your training, recovery, and mental state, mental clarity. And that means it's important not only to athletics, but health and life itself. And it's those intersections that I just love talking about. So our guest is Leo Ryan. Leo is the founder of InnateStrength.com. He has achieved a prolific amount of education, human performance, and breath work. He's studied from, I believe, more than 70 breathing techniques, such as the Wim Hof, Buteyko Method, Oxygen Advantage, and clearly tons of others. He's been a coach and mentor to many elite athletes, and has worked with coaches to Olympians, UFC fighters, and world champions. So Leo is both a breathing instructor and a physical performance coach, working with a wide range of clients. Today's show was a little bit longer than average, largely because, one, I just don't know that much really holistically about the breath and breathing. So I had a ton of questions for Leo, but it was really cool because we were really able to get into a lot of really important elements. So we start with a fun story of Leo's running a marathon on zero run training, just founding the pace on the breath. So he'll get into that. But some of the big rocks that we cover in this show are different categories and classifications of breathing, nose breathing versus mouth breathing, and different levels of that depending on what your athletic goal is. We're going to get into breathing as a readiness assessment and using that prior to a session, performance breathing versus recovery breathing, breathing's impact on the mental state and how to manage that through different techniques, diaphragm release techniques, and much more. This is super comprehensive. It's a really important topic. And breathing is becoming more popular now for good reason, although it's been around for or breath training has been around for thousands of years, and the martial arts and everything. But as it's becoming more apparent in the athletic performance space, and as well as the general health space, I wanted to do a show that really gets to it, that really covers this, and I hope to do a lot more of these. So I'm super thankful that I had the opportunity to talk with Leo today. We're going to get to this. It's going to be an awesome show and really expansive. So here we go, episode 219 with Leo Ryan. So Leo, I heard you ran a marathon with no running or formal training for it. Can you tell me a little bit more about that story?
Sure. It was back in 2017, and I always wanted to run a marathon, but I'll be honest, I've been quite busy, and I just never really put my mind to dedicate myself to the training. And I also, with my own background, I just felt that there was a lot of deficiencies in the training programs for marathon. So it kind of came to a head where, one, I wanted to test my ideas on breath training, and two, it came down to time as well. So I ended up running the Dublin Marathon in 2017. I decided I hadn't ran in 7 years, no endurance training, no bicycling, no swimming, no running at all, and I didn't do any running in the training program for the marathon either. So what I decided I would do is I would get tested. I would do some VO2 max testing with a gentleman here in Ireland, and did that. And that kind of started to blow open the doors for me in terms of what was happening with breathing and endurance sport, what was happening in the respiratory system. And I began to understand more the relationship between breathing and fatigue, really is what it was about. So when I ran the first one, at the start of the program, I ran it, and what he found most interesting was my fractional extraction of oxygen, FeO2. He found that really interesting because it was up and over 7%, maybe even 7.5%, and he thought that was absolutely phenomenal. And I was like, okay. He says, how do you think you got on? I says, well, I have no data to go off. You are telling me everything here that I need to go. So what happened in the test was I decided for the test, I wanted to test out the difference between all nasal breathing, which I call level 1, nose-mouth breathing, which I call level 2, and then mouth-mouth breathing, which I would refer to as level 3, right? So as we went through the VO2 max test, I would give a thumbs up for the exact moment that I switched, when I switched ventilation hole, for want of a better word. So, he would write down on the test, and he was marking on the test where that happened on the test. So what we found interesting was the relationship between switching from all nasal breathing to in through the nose and out through the mouth. And that was within 10 seconds of the anaerobic threshold. And that for me was way more important. I was like, whoa, that kind of really opened up the doorway for me into how I was actually going to run this marathon. Because without having done any running, I had no idea how to pace myself and how I was going to last that type of distance. So I then embarked on a training program based around breath work and looking after my joints. Like I did a lot of rehab style training for the joints to make sure that system at least was okay, and I wasn't going to do myself any long-term injury by stepping on the pavement for 26.2 miles. But the guts of the training was all based around the breathing. We did another test just before, and again, that relationship stayed there, so really close between the AT and the switching of breathing vents. And that's when I made the decision that I would actually tape my mouth for the marathon as well. So I would only nasal breathe for the whole marathon. And the reason for that is if you think of it, if you develop a large aerobic base, or if you can continually pump oxygen into your cells for the duration of a marathon, well then, you know, where does fatigue kick in? It comes down to neuromuscular fatigue as opposed to general fatigue from carbon dioxide or from draining the lactate system as well. So that was my only gauge of what pace I could take. So yeah, I ended up running it with with all nasal breathing.
I wonder if you would have just kept going, how long you could. You know, you're like I'm saying, if you have the pace that you're at, you're always going to have oxygen in your cells. Then it comes down to the joints. Probably either your joints are going to break or a muscle is going to go, or like you said, neuromuscular fatigue. I'm kind of curious if you would have just kept going.
Either your brain will give up because of the actual pain of the localized pain in the muscles, and your brain can play games with you. Like I brought in all the mind games that an athlete would bring in to help them to keep going. And it was funny because there was at one point in the race, I think it was about maybe mile 18 or 19 in. And I actually, in my mind, I went, all these mind games are all a load of bullshit. Like they don't work at all. This is a lot of rubbish. And then, hold on, they got me this far. Maybe do I have any more in the bag that I continue to use and continue to play with? But it's an interesting question is how far can you push the human body? And this is where ultra endurance running is fascinating to me as well. And that how far can people actually run once they find their rhythm and find their pace and match their pace to the natural rhythms of the body?
Yeah, no, it's really fascinating stuff. I think for me, a lot of my exploration. Well, I was going to say too, how many mental training techniques have probably been come up with by people who are running like marathons or in the middle of like ultra. You know, they're like, you got nothing. You got all that time to practice. So I'm sure when you're done,
and a whole lot of pain as a motivation to find them, right?
Yeah. I was gonna say as well. I just think it's funny how many other people probably had their mouths taped during that. I'm sure zero, right? Or like,
but 2017 mouth taping wasn't really done. Like if you think of the oxygen advantage is what is the method that's most associated with mouth taping in the West, which actually is built on the Buteyko Method. So, but athletes weren't looking at this stuff. Like I've been doing it for the last 10, 15 years. I would play with mouth taping and sport and all the rest, and experiment with that with both myself and my clients. But nobody was doing. Now you'll see you'll see a handful of people every marathon taping their mouth.
But really,
for me, it doesn't make sense. Like I was doing it for a purpose, right? If I really wanted to perform in a marathon and I wanted to hit a PB and I trained for it fully, I wouldn't mouth tape because I would want to drop into an anaerobic state. I want to push my body so hard that it has to reuse lactate as a fuel source. You want to push to the very ends of your performance. Maybe not when you're halfway through, but certainly towards the penultimate stage of the race, you would want to be really pushing that barrier, right?
Yeah, you like rip the tape off with like a couple miles to go or something, right?
Exactly. It's like you see in Formula One, they go in and they change their tires with 20, 30 laps to go, and you go, okay, now it's the business end of the season here, right?
Yeah. That makes sense now with level. I know we'll get into all this stuff too, because I was thinking about the level 1, 2, and 3 and what you were talking about a little bit there when you first started. And I was like, okay, now this makes sense to me, because I was just thinking, if I'm training for the 400 meters and I'm running some 300 repeats or something, I'm running like 4 300s really fast, and I ran them all with only nose breathing, then I'm not going to get into those. It's not going to let me into those lactate systems. Well, that'd be a rough one.
It is a rough one. It is. And that's the interesting thing, because when I did that, when I did those VO2 max tests, I hadn't heard of anybody in the world at the time talking about this. I had begun speaking with Brian McKenzie from Power Speed Endurance and now Shift Adapt. And he was toying with similar ideas at the same time as I was. We had spoken. He had introduced me to the Wim Hof element and the performance end of breathing, where he, I believe, more started. And then I showed him more of the oxygen advantage and the Buteyko and the nose breathing end of things. And from there, then we both developed very, very similarly across the board, both with ourselves and with our own athletes and our own clients. But when I ran that marathon, I thought, wow, this is fascinating, but it's just me. And by the way, to finish that, when I finished the marathon, just to show you its effects on fatigue, is my wife was there at the end line, and she was like, wow, Leo, you look really fresh. Like, you look so fresh. What's going on? I says, do you know what? I feel really fresh. My muscles now from my ribs down are destroyed. Like my running mechanics went to pot, so they did. But I felt really good overall in terms of energy wise. And it was funny because I got down and I started, already shoes off, socks off, started massaging my feet, started wiggling around the big toes, started bringing some movement and variety of movement into my body. And within 3 days, I was fully recovered from the event.
Wow.
I was completely recovered, where I went, okay, my main sport at the time was actually judo. And I was competing. I had a second eye on competing in the All Ireland's in the Masters event, the over 30s event, which was the following week. And because the marathon, I hadn't trained for it. I was training what I was doing, but I couldn't risk the injury. So on the Wednesday, I was feeling pretty fantastic. I says, okay, I'm going to go in. And I did a full training session Thursday and felt absolutely amazing, and competed the following Sunday, which was a week later.
Wow.
And I ended up getting a bronze medal in the whole event. But again, the effects of the one-off marathon and the mileage of just 26 miles had no long-term effects on me that way.
It's amazing. It makes you really think.
Compare that to what people do generally for a marathon, and you're going, your training could be improved so much better, right?
Yeah, and as you were saying, I was just thinking about the implications for just recovering from training in general. Because I was alluding to, I'm more of a speed power athlete myself. I know a lot of people listening to this podcast are, but if you can use that breath work and recover from a marathon like that, because that's one of many things that I'm interested in, is just energy and recovery potential. It also leads me to think, well, why do we get sore and joints just, everything gets destroyed, and everything going back, or a big part of it going back to, like you said, energy in the cell and fatigue, and where does this all start,
That's your number one aspect to it. And I was so fascinated by it. I was training a Gaelic football as an amateur sport over here in Ireland, although the athletes that train in it they train pretty tough. They'd be almost at a semi-pro level. They'd be very dedicated. And I've been training this team for the previous must have been two years at that stage. So I said, okay, I went and I paid privately for all of the VO2 max tests, and I attended them, took a cohort of 10 of them, and sent them through the same protocol for the VO2 max test. And all of them got similar results to me, which was as they hit their anaerobic threshold, within 10 to 15 seconds, they all changed their breathing vent from all nasal to nose-mouth. So for me, again, this told, okay, this is big implications for energy management and your energy systems training going forward. And at the time, there was little to no research on energy systems training and the way you breathe. Back then, like now we know, for example, with we know that mouth breathing, so pure mouth breathing, will burn more sugar than nasal breathing. So if you're using up more sugar in your system, and then you're depleting stores of glucose, then you're gonna, again, if you look at the inference across, in my mind, the theory then obviously goes that you start reusing lactate as well as an energy source quicker than if you're fat, especially in an endurance sport where you're fat adapted and where you're breathing efficiently.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I was thinking about as you're talking, and I think about just different contexts. Like if I am training more of a repeated sprintability, short sprintability, I think the easiest thing, I'll ask this, but I do want to get to my next question. Although I love how this is so conversational, because you just, right off the bat, that marathon thing just sparked 10 questions in me. So we just roll with it. But I think it's very easy just
we can go with the structure, we can go off course. This is your choice.
Okay. I'll go with this one, and eventually maybe I'll get to my next question. So, but I think it's very easy for any conditioning just to say, okay, tape the mouth, nose only, and more aerobic, and like you said, mouth open, less sugar burning. But if it's more of a quick repeated burst, you'd want that sugar to as the fuel source, right? Wouldn't you like to be able to have more for some of the power based bursts, or how does that work?
Yeah, there is a playoff between the two. Obviously, I would agree with that. But from my own experience coaching, but also from speaking with a couple of different doctors and sports medicine people and coaches as well, you are essentially, unless you're a pure power sport like a Olympic weightlifting, like a powerlifting type sport, you do want a decent aerobic base to you. Mm-hmm. So, and to even though you want to be hitting more creatine phosphate earlier on anyway, so which is immediate, and I don't have relationships between creatine phosphate usage and breathing, your breathing level. But certainly in terms of you want to be as efficient for as long as you can. Now, if your anatomy is built that you can get enough air through the system and dispel enough carbon dioxide, then why wouldn't you want to spare your glycogen resources until you absolutely need them? For example, in the last 10, 20, 30 meters of a sprint instead of through 150 meters of a 200 sprint, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense.
Like if you can produce the same force because you've trained force through your physical training, your sprint training, well then why wouldn't you want to spare and be as efficient as possible and spare that glycogen for as long as you can?
Yeah, no, yeah, that helps me out. Hey, X-Phys and cellular metabolism and all these and the energy systems. If I had to say like all these areas in my weakness, that's definitely my weakness. That's where my kind of like little bit of ADDness and X-Phys college courses comes out a little bit. But this is the way I learn it. Like if it's like applied and breathing, this all reminds me a little bit too of I've did a podcast with Aaron Davis and Evan Pike on the Moxie monitor, which measures, you put on your muscle and it measures blood oxygen as you're training. And once you get to a certain level of saturation where there's not much oxygen left in the cell, that's where training recovery gets prolonged. And so that's where everything lights up for me. I'm like, oh, wait, like that, like it just in terms of day-to-day training. And that's the aerobic base too. People talk, I think it's easy to say, oh, we don't need to train the aerobic system. Well, if you know how are you going to recover? And it's easy to get in the bucket where you're going to have prolonged recovery periods too. If you are like more of a regular, more on the power side of things, not Olympic weightlifter perhaps, but.
I train two judo Olympians currently at the minute, and the benefits of the breath train is all about recovery. That's where I said there is enhancements to performance, but for the majority, it has got to do with recovery. Both recovery, if you're a field sport athlete, so it's recovery in between sprints, is phenomenal and phenomenally powerful through breathing methods. But then also post-event recovery and preparation for the next day, it is the main, for me, it's the main recovery modality. It's where it all starts.
That's awesome. Maybe that's
for that sprint athlete, their ability to use their nose during an all-out sprint will be determined, in my opinion, through their anatomy. So I grew up with chronic childhood asthma. And if you look at the research, the associations between mouth breathing and jaw development and nose development and teeth structure there's a lot of evidence behind that. And if you look at my structures, I've got very narrow nose, very long nose, very narrow jawline and pointed jawline. And it's difficult for me, actually, my nose, if you're to look up them, they're very small. The nostrils are quite small. And so my ability to all-out sprint with nose-only breathing is much more difficult than, say, for example, a sprinter with a very strong jawline and huge big nostrils and broader airways.
Yeah, they're probably getting in one nostril what you're getting into when you're doing
exactly,
that.
Yeah.
That's funny. Awesome. So all this, I mean, you've kind of answered it on some level, but my next formal question was, I mean, breathing, it's really important, obviously, but why is it so underappreciated? I think we're starting to get to it a little bit more, but why do you think this is something that we don't really, it isn't in like every training method? Like why do you think it's kind of underappreciated?
Yeah, even I know you said it's important, but I suppose for people, what I like to do is, because I've now looked at it from that broader scope, where I'm going, well, why is it important? Well, it's important not only for recovery, but if you think of where your breathing system lies, and I say breathing system because it's more than just respiratory. You're talking about the neuromuscular aspect of it. You're talking about, you're talking about the lungs itself, and then you're talking about what breathing can do for strength and the tension on the kinetic chain as well. So it has a primary role both in terms of mechanics and movement mechanics, and also then in terms of your physiology. So how you get oxygen to the cell. For example, you spoke about that equipment there that they use in terms of looking at blood oxygen level, but blood oxygen isn't, you don't necessarily want oxygen just in the blood, you want oxygen in the cell. Now, to get oxygen into the cell is it's a bigger story than just oxygen. We might go into that in a little bit. But so you've got a role to play in terms of getting oxygen into the cell, but then you also have roles to play in terms of your ability to put attention and keep your concentration. So there are psychological aspects to breathing as well. And it's just because of its position in terms of anatomy and in terms of how we're built as human beings. That's why it's so important. Yeah. Why is it overlooked? Oh, man. When you put that question, I thought, how do I even think of this? I don't know. My own thoughts is it's cultural, and in that most breathing techniques have come from the East with an Eastern philosophy, more qualitative.
Yes.
It's more difficult to quantify the breath. In fact, there's no definition of what a good breath is. There are a lot of, let's say, correlates. There are a lot of things that indicate a high quality breath, but nobody has said, nobody's been able to turn around and say, this is a good breath and this is a good breath in sport, right? But we are getting to that stage now as researchers are beginning to integrate. So you have the psychologists coming together with the neurophysiologists, coming together with the biomechanics, and they're beginning to look at breathing from a multi-dimensional perspective.
I wanted to take a quick break from the show to share with you a little bit about what our sponsor, simplyfaster.com, now has available in their store. You hear me mention in the outro of the show all the time about the Freelap timing system in the K-Box, which I have and use regularly. But today I wanted to share a little bit more about the bar speed monitoring units that SimplyFaster has, which is the GymAware and the new portable Flex unit. So let me start with the GymAware. I mention it regularly on the show. It's been referred to as the Cadillac of bar speed monitors. Carl Valley calls it a lab inside a lunchbox, as the readings you get out of the GymAware go well beyond typical concentric or just up phase of the lift velocities. Rather, you can measure the entire shape of the barbell lift in terms of eccentric velocity, range of motion, and total work done. Total work being awesome, by the way, especially like comparing a long-armed bench presser or a 6'10 squatter versus a 5'11 point guard. So you're getting all these extra metrics that you're not getting on other units. It's perfect for teams wanting to manage the weight room, and the data synchronizes to software platforms such as CoachMe Plus, Team Builder, and Athlete Monitoring. So new to the store is the Flex, which is the ultra portable and lower price travel version of the coach's favorite GymAware. So just like the GymAware, the Flex measures the shape of each rep, range of motion, total work done, eccentric dynamics. So for this and the GymAware, this is the advantage that a force plate would have over just knowing how high you jumped. You're getting many other metrics and information that go into this unit of work. Compared to similar portable bar speed monitors, this unit gets the entire rep rather than a fraction. So you have here two awesome tools. And if you're interested in upping your game in the velocity-based training and bar speed world, I would definitely recommend heading to the store at simplyfaster.com and checking into these two units. All right, let's get back to the show. Yeah, when you said that's more subtle, I was like, yep, that's it. Because I think in strength and conditioning, particularly athletic performance, it's so quantitative. You know, like give me a number behind this. Like, and I'm sure you can get numbers. It's just not. And I think it's with your recovery too. It's almost more of a subtle effect. Like, how do you gauge? Like, if I'm training and I did set of like, a depth jump workout, a plyometric workout, and my vertical went up. Oh, wow. I can definitely see that was, well, I imagine with breathing, you can start noting improved recovery, but I imagine it's potentially outside of the, like you said, the vast potential in endurance sports where you're going to notice it, like marathons and endurance. Perhaps the recovery element may be more subtle, or the mental effects may be slightly more subtle for many people, would you say? Or can it be a big dramatic thing?
They are, and you have to be in tune with what's going on. But for me, breathing is more sensitive than HRV as a measurement on general stress. And that's what I found in my practice. I used to use HRV a lot with clients. I only use HRV now with people who are not tuned into their breath. And so people who aren't aware of what the characteristics of a quality breath and the efficiency of it. There are now some methods that quantify the physiological aspects of breathing. So, for example, it's called CO2 tolerance. So that they look at measuring the CO2 tolerance level of your system. And that started originally with Buteyko back in the 1950s. He was the first one to quantify the breath and show what a quality breath should have from a physiological perspective. And that's why I love that method. It's how I started, but that's why it has so much power to it. It's different than most other breathing techniques that came from yoga or meditation or qigong or Buddhism.
Yeah, and so you're talking about those qualitative elements of breathing and versus HRV. So how do you assess the breath like in that manner? Because I think HRV is pretty popular in those assessment and readiness meters, and this all makes me think too. Just I think about every time I go into coach, I do think about how is this an art form? Like how is this something that I can say after 3 years of work, I have definitively become 10 times better than I was when I first started. And I think with a piece of technology is great, but if I'm just relying on a machine to tell me a number every single time, I feel like I can't say that I grew as much as a practitioner by just relying versus you have to pick up on all those little subtleties the same way an athlete has to pick up on, thousands or tens of thousands of different little pieces of information. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's interesting. That's why I wanted to ask you too. What are you assessing there?
Okay, so originally I would have used the Buteyko Method, which is what the Oxygen Advantage is built on. So Dr. Buteyko was a Russian doctor, and he actually was diagnosed with at the time it was a fatal diagnosis of high blood pressure and heart disease. So he was given, I think, about 6 months to live, and medication couldn't save him. They didn't have anything for him back in the day. And the story goes was that he was also observing, by the way, in his practice, he was observing people who were on their deathbeds, and he noticed that the closer they got to dying, the bigger their breathing got and the more distorted their breathing became. So he played with the idea of reducing the breath and of breath holding. And within an instant, he noticed a difference to how he felt, to pains in his kidneys and in his body, and to headaches, that they all started to disappear. And he thought, this is fascinating. So he embarked on a 10-year journey of discovery, primarily around the Bohr effect and how carbon dioxide has a huge role to play in getting oxygen into the cells, from the bloodstream into the cells. And then he went on in Russia to promote the method, to teach people in the method, and he was known to have cured many, many diseases. Now, when I say cure, I know people shy away from that word. Cure simply means, if you look it up in the dictionary, is to get rid of all symptoms. That's all. So that's the only context I'm using that word in, okay? Just in case we get ourselves in trouble here. So when you look at it, he developed a whole measurement scale to his method, which he said related carbon dioxide tolerance across to your health status. In terms of dysfunctional breathing and related disease effects, depending on your genetics. And as you improved your CO2 tolerance, as you built that up and built that up and built that up, well, then your symptoms of disease decreased and decreased and decreased and decreased and decreased until they became absolutely nothing. when he didn't have any symptoms at all. And this is associated with DeCosta syndrome and over pretty much every inflammatory disease or lifestyle disease, but you're looking at over 150 different diseases is what they looked at. Now, I'll qualify this in saying that since Dr. Buteyko passed away, late 90s, early 2000s, there has been some, he did have, by the way, he had some clinical trials which showed a great effectiveness on asthma. In particular, that's the one that they went after because it's a respiratory disease. But his theory has been unproven since, that CO2 tolerance itself is responsible. But they actually now, modern research is looking at CO2 sensitivity, which is your chemoreceptor response of carbon dioxide, or how quickly your brain picks up CO2 in your system. That does have a powerful influence on both the resilience of your respiratory system, and then because of its importance in your respiratory system, then how that relates across to other diseases. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that was the measurement scale that I used a lot, was his control pause scale. Okay. And as you take it, I'll tell you exactly what it is. It's a normal breath in and out of the nose. And after your exhale, you pinch and hold the nose. And you release at your first urges to breathe. Nice, you're doing it there.
Yeah, I learned by doing so.
yeah, that's okay. Your first sensation to breathe, you release. And you time that breath hold, is what you do. People know it now more as the Bolt score and the oxygen advantage. It's the same thing. It's the same thing. So as you get used to taking that Bolt, and as you improve that Bolt score and improve it, you'll just get in touch with the subtleties of pain in the body, of fatigue in the body, because of the role of your respiratory system in all of these things. And because you're taking it every morning, you're able to check in internally with your system every single morning and know how it's feeling, know how it's getting on. So it's a great gateway into how are you feeling and what is your resiliency level like. And then from there, like, it becomes very simple to qualitatively check in and see what it's like. And for me, HRV just was less sensitive to it. That's all. I'm not knocking HRV in any sense. I think that it's helped a lot of my clients who are completely unaware. It gives them a measurement to grab a hold of. And as a coach, if I have a team, it's very handy because I can just check in with those numbers across the board. Well, for somebody who is in touch with their body and what shape they're in and how they're feeling, then the breathing is far more sensitive.
Interesting. I love it that the body's always going to tell you. I was going to ask too, because occasionally I do Wim Hof breathing in the mornings. I just kind of, I like the mental state, and I like challenges too, because you hold your breath at the end. You take 30 big breaths and then you hold for how long you can go, and I always like just kind of seeing where I'm at too. So in reality, on some level, I'm sure they're clearly not the same, but can you tell me again how long you can hold your breath? Because I've seen this in just general health assessments too. Hold your breath right now. How long can you go? And if it's like 20 seconds, you're. So could you just, in a nutshell, what does that say? If you cannot hold your breath for very long, just whatever state, what does that say about you physiologically that relates to HRV? Okay,
so let's talk. We're going to have to dive into cellular metabolism a little bit. Okay,
that's okay. I'm good.
Okay, cells produce ATP, right? We know that the way a healthy cell produces ATP is you have enough oxygen getting into the cell and enough nutrients coming from your food and your digestive system. Okay, what comes out with ATP in an aerobic working system is carbon dioxide, heat, lactate, and hydrogen ion. That's what comes out with ATP. Okay. Now, when what the main, according to the Bohr effect, which was in 1904, discovered in 1904, what the Bohr effect essentially says is it's the level of carbon dioxide which determines how quickly oxygen gets into your cell. Okay. So if you're very sensitive to carbon dioxide, in other words, if as soon as your brain senses CO2 in your system, a rise in CO2 in your system, well, then you'll begin to hyperventilate and blow it off if you're very sensitive. So if you are less sensitive or have a higher CO2 tolerance to it, if you build it up, so your brain doesn't freak out at the first sign of it, well, then you will be able to get more oxygen into your cell. Your cells will function better. Okay? So a better functioning cell means better regulation of your energy throughout the body, right? More ATP, better aerobic system, everything working better. The other side of the coin is as well, CO2 is one of the few things that passes the blood-brain barrier. In fact, it's the only gas that passes the blood-brain barrier. So the reason you breathe is nothing to do with oxygen at sea level. Okay, in a healthy person, the reason you breathe is, first of all, to exhale carbon dioxide, to get rid of a buildup of metabolic waste. Okay? But if you're highly sensitive to it because you've patterned in a mouth breathing or a big breathing pattern over many years, so if you're very sensitive to it, then that brain gets very sensitive to CO2, which means it automatically elicits a fight or flight response. So it will start to pump adrenaline through the body. And that adrenaline doesn't get used, it can send you into anxiety and panic attacks. So, for example, Dr. Feldman over there in the States has done a lot of research into carbon dioxide as a metabolic stress molecule, which means that, for example, one piece of research was there's a very rare disease, and this was said recently in James Nestor's book, Breath. There's a very rare disease which the amygdala in the brain don't develop, which is where we get our fear response from, is what psychiatry thinks. So this one particular lady, they tried for years and years, I think they got to 10 years to elicit a fear response in her, and they couldn't elicit any fear response in her whatsoever. So Dr. Feldman took her into her labs and said, okay, we're going to administer you now a bolus dose of carbon dioxide. You might get panicky, but, just stay calm, stay relaxed and see how you get on. She puts that mask on her, one breath, 30% carbon dioxide, and she flips out, rips the mask off her, pure hyperventilation. No, get that out. She wouldn't even finish the rest of the test.
Wow.
Yeah. So we now know that there is a huge role for CO2 to play in anxiety, performance anxiety, and panic and fear.
Yeah, I think that it's really amazing. It's, if you look at like the totem pole, I remember like Paul Chek's totem pole, and it's like that all the way up at the top. It's such a critical function, so it just makes perfect sense that it goes so far beyond recovery, but just goes so far beyond recovery too. And I think that's why it's so important. Leo, I need to ask you before I get, because I'm just going to keep having follow-ups because this will just be my, but so what you mentioned, I know you mentioned you had asthma earlier. Is that what got you into breath training? I was just curious what got you into this and what led you into all this.
Yeah, I was blessed to have asthma, is how I will put it nowadays. I had really bad asthma when I was a kid. Like to the point of where I would have GPs come into my house in the middle of the night to administer extra medication to me because I couldn't breathe and my system was shutting down. I was hospitalized on several occasions. And when I was good, I was good. I loved sport. I played a lot of Gaelic games, did every sport under the sun as a young guy. But this asthma just kept on coming back and biting me in the butt, so to speak. It was also, as I was nearing, like I had ideas and dreams to play inter-county football, which would be the elite level of Gaelic games. But as I was approaching a critical age, kind of end of teenage years, this was just getting worse and worse and worse. So I spent, when I was about the age of 19, I spent a total of 6 months in bed because of asthma attacks and respiratory infections following on from the asthma attacks. I had over 14 courses of antibiotics and over 400 steroid tablets, 3 inhalers 3 times a day, and a further tablet to manage my asthma symptoms. And doctors gave me no hope. Literally, my GP said, look, I'll get you an appointment with one of the top consultants, respiratory consultants in Ireland, but that's going to take a while because that's how our healthcare system works. But in the meantime, there's not much we can do. And I said, but look, I really want to be a trainer. That's what I'd like to go into. And he laughed at me. And he says, look, if we wrap you up in bubble wrap and put you away till you're 25, we don't know if you're going to get better. We have no idea. We're doing everything we can, but there's no solution here. After that, I left his office and life kind of went on for normal until my mom rang me and she said, look, there's this guy, this Irish guy, went over to Russia and learned the Buteyko Method. His name is Patrick McKeown. He's here and he's begun teaching workshops. Do you want to get on a workshop? I says, yeah, I'd love to. She says, well, there's one next week. I says, great, let's go. And so I was brought over, I was in one of his first cohort of workshops. This must have been back in about 2003. I think he started teaching late 2002. And so I went in, learned the Buteyko Method, learned the physiology of how it works, and got to work training it 3 times a day, every day. By the time I had seen the respiratory consultant a year later, I was completely symptom-free. I had reduced all of my respiratory infections. The gap between them kept on growing larger and larger and larger, and all my asthma symptoms were disappearing. And he gave me the all clear to come off my medication. And it was about 18 months of training where I became symptom and medication free. And kind of then from there, I did what I said I'd do. I went in to become a trainer, focusing on personal training. Athletics and sport isn't that big in Ireland. We don't have that many full-time athletes. We're not as lucky as you guys over in the States. So I went into the general fitness area and started working with a lot of people with, initially it was weight loss in particular, but everybody seemed to have a chronic disease behind them. And I noticed the power of movement and the power of nutrition on them. And all the while I was thinking, geez, I'm missing something here. And it was about, at this stage now, it must have been about 7-8 years ago, I turned around and I know I got to go back and study the breathing techniques and bring these to my people to help them. And that's when I went on the journey. When I was back doing my Buteyko qualifications, that's when I heard of the Wim Hof Method. And I was like, whoa, what's this stuff? Because Wim Hof is like, he's big breathing. He's like, just breathe, motherfucker. He's like, just do it any way you can. Just follow the method. And Buteyko is no. It's all nose breathing. It's calm breathing. It's relaxed breathing. It's breath holding. And once I had my eyes open to that, I was going, well, what on earth else is out there? What are other people teaching? What's yoga breathing? I found some Russian martial arts breathing, Japanese martial arts breathing. What is the biomechanics of breathing? I just started to peel back every single technique and method I could. I've kind of looked at over 100 techniques now from many, many different methods and backgrounds. And what I've been doing for the last good to 5 years, in fact, more particularly since the marathon, especially since then, as I've tried to find as much research as I possibly can from whatever area, whether it's psychiatry or physiology or biomechanics, and find out what on earth is going on with breathing and how it affects people.
You're listening to the Just Fly Performance Podcast, brought to you by Simply Faster. Yeah, that was something I was really looking forward to talking with you about, because I think it's very easy just to say, okay, just breathe this way, like just belly breathe, or just tape your mouth shut, or and not that those are bad. I mean, it's certainly a huge step in there. Even the simplest means can usually be extremely effective. But I hear all these different things on how to breathe. At first, my first learning was just breathe through your belly, because it won't stress you out. And then it's like, oh well, your belly should rise this much, and your chest should rise this much, and it's like, well, what? And then you think about Wim Hof too, and I think about this in coaching athletics. Is like, you can't, at some point you can't overcoach a person through something they should do naturally. At the end of the day, Like if I'm coaching, yeah, all right. So go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say, but what if their system's shut down? What if they can't get access to those muscles that are supposed to do the work? Like you can shout at somebody all you like, belly breathe, belly breathe, belly breathe. You can put blocks and kettlebells and hands on and give them all the kinesthetic awareness that you want. But what if they just can't do it because their diaphragm is that retracted because of, perhaps it was because of an injury, perhaps it was because of a long-term emotional stress. Perhaps it's because they've been eating food that their body doesn't like, and so the diaphragm just shut down and can't work as well. So this is where you got to look at the breathing system as a whole and go, okay, well, there's mechanical aspects that we have to restore, and think of it like any other rehab program. You've got to be able to innervate those muscles and enable them to do their work, for them to do their work. Then for me, you get down to the business of training your breath. And honestly, I don't know anybody else who uses that term as breath training. I kind of, in my own mind, I came up with it because I'm a trainer and I've been training S&C work for so long that that's how I think of developing the human body, is everything is training. Which means that it's not, oh, I did this one technique and I got some results, so yay, happy days for me, because yes, that worked for you. What else are you leaving on the table, though? You know, and then there's the other people who try a breathing technique and it doesn't work for them. And they're like, well, breathing doesn't work for me at all. Like, I'm not going near that stuff. That's a load of rubbish. So I kind of look at a periodized system of breath training and how that fits in with the conditioning of an athlete as well, for a given purpose. So you have to restore the mechanics like any other movement practice that you want. You got to have sound biomechanics. Then you have to train the physiological component, which what we're talking about earlier on is improve your tolerance to carbon dioxide. And then you have to be able to use the breathing for a particular purpose, whether that's for generating power, strength and power through the kinetic chain, or whether that's for efficiency in a marathon. And you have to choose what works for you in that moment and train that so that then becomes your default pattern, subconscious pattern that you don't even.
Yeah, that fits really well. I like to bring things back to training someone in a sport movement, because I think a lot of people listening to this really resonate with that. And a saying I like, it's really could be two things. It's strength or structure dictates the function. Like I can't coach an athlete into a particular position that is quote unquote biomechanically correct if they don't have the structure, the structural links, the strength to get them there fluidly and naturally and organically. Otherwise, I'm just manufacturing something. And so
yes.
I'm glad you brought that up with the breathing, because I think it's very easy just to say, you know, breathe this way. So could you actually get in detail then, like what, like, and if an athlete, what are some limitations, some structural limitations that's going to keep, and you did mention it, but how would you kind of approach these things, if these structural limitations that an athlete might have, that it's just going to keep them from having a good breath in general before we even get to the technique? Because a lot of times I think with coaching athletes, I mean, that's, I think, one of the beautiful things of being a physical prep coach, if you will. And sometimes there is a skill divide in terms of what you can get to on a skill, but you can set the groundwork for these things that can become lots of things. So what's the groundwork? What should people have in place to be able to get these proper breaths in?
Okay, so you should be able, unless you've got a broken nose and deviated septum, you should be able to, and it deviated so badly that you can't physically breathe through your nose even for a minute, right? Well, then you should have patterned in nose breathing at rest, okay? So your nose to inhale and to exhale at rest. That should be your daily breathing pattern. If that's not happening, well, then you will have a higher sympathetic drive, and you will have, and again, that will have the knock-on effects of having higher sympathetic tone versus being able to have a high parasympathetic tone, right? Does that make sense?
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah. If you're I'm sorry. If you're mouth breathing all day, I'm sure that's not going to be very good for the parasympathetic tone at all. Just like the carbon dioxide experiment, I'm sure. Yeah. Go breathe through your mouth for the next hour and then tell me what you feel like after an hour.
Yeah. And that's, one of the greatest books written, in my opinion, on breathing is the most latest was the book by James Nestor, Breath, because here is a journalist, not a breathing, he's a writer, so he writes beautifully and he explains the story beautifully, and he goes into the anatomy, he goes into the biomechanics, he goes into the impacts of CO2. He did an experiment for the book where he himself and his training buddy they went to Stanford and blocked up their nose for 10 days so that they couldn't physically breathe through their nose. Now, this was an experiment done by a Dr. Harbaugh back in the 70s on monkeys, but as far as I know, it was never done on humans. So they blocked up their nose, and within one day, his prevalence of snoring increased by over 300%.
Wow.
Within one day. By the end of the 10 days, he was developing sleep apnea, which again has huge consequences for cardiovascular disease, diabetes, even some cancers as well, right? It's huge. So just to go back to what you asked me was, I want athletes to be able to pattern in all nasal breathing at rest during the day and the night. Then how should the breath look? It should, yes, the belly should rise, followed by the chest. Then your exhale should let go. So if you listen to what I do here, so that was a breath that was in through my nose and out of my mouth. As I inhaled through the nose, my belly rose, then my chest rose. As I exhaled, it was just recoiled. It just fell out of my mouth with an open jaw. And you would be amazed the amount of athletes who can't do that. Amazed. And for me, if you're unable to do that, well, then you have work to do on your biomechanics of breathing.
What?
And that's the first thing.
What are some things that happen instead? By the way, I really like when you say recoil. I like that because I'm always about elasticity, right? Like I like that.
Yeah.
Recoil.
And the exhale is the elastic component of the breath.
Yeah, it's the load and unload. Always going to have that. So breathing in the first bit through the belly, then the chest comes in, then it recoils. What are some things that are happening instead? I'm assuming probably just all chest breathing being one, but what are some dysfunctional patterns that you see?
And I'd suggest any of your listeners lie on the floor on your back, bend your knees, and try video yourself doing it, because here's the funniest thing is most people they think their belly is rising or their chest is rising, and it's not. And when you look at it on a video, you'd be like, oh, that's not moving. Why isn't that moving? And that's genuinely what happens. Some people are reverse breathers, which means they only chest breathe, no lower rib movement at all, no diaphragm excursion at all. Other people can actually breathe into the lower aspects of the ribs and into the belly, but they can't move their upper chest. They're kind of mid to upper chest at all. And then some people hold their breath at the top, and then they also control their breath on the way out.
I think I do that
as a default breathing pattern. So they're the type of stuff that I look for is okay, when they're inhaling, does the belly, the belly is a representation. You're not pushing the belly. Well, what I mean by that is do the lower ribs move, and does the belly move? Does it either move upwards or does it move out to the side? Can you access that diaphragm? The second part go on ahead. So teaching only belly breathing, that would be good for someone who couldn't move their belly maybe, but beyond that, it is a weak technique in my opinion. It can work, but it can take an awful lot of time to ingrain a diaphragmatic breath by just saying belly breathe or pacing blocks on their stomach.
Okay, cool.
I used to use kinesthetic awareness with the fingers and the hands. I use a couple of different diaphragm release techniques, which are far more potent. They can change someone's breathing within a session. They're just pretty good. went to experts in their fields and found out what they do and found they work pretty well. But then I have people who you free up the diaphragm and that's working fine, but they can't get full access to the chest muscles, to the intercostal muscles, and they can't inflate the chest at all. So their upper chest is, I know you can see this, but in around your logo, if you think on your chest, that they can't access that area of their breath at all, and so the breath becomes stuck. And if you think of it from a athlete's perspective, if you can't fill your lungs with air, well then you are leaving change on the table when it comes to training your energy systems, because you're not taking a full vacuum in of air, right? So you're gonna fatigue early, or it's gonna take you longer to warm up, which is the other side of the coin.
So speaking of warm-ups, when someone comes in for a training session, I'm sure it's completely, there's a lot of individual factors, but how long do you spend at the front end of a training session or the back end? I mean, I think that's the common time. It's just, all right, we're going to do some breathing to warm up or to cool down or to get parasympathetic. What does a training session of yours look like? Like how does that integrate in, and how are you working that within the session? Like just for, let's just say a gym session for like strength.
Yeah, no problem. For me initially, there's not much fun. I will allow people to do their physical training. Either as if they come into me, usually they've been in their sport for years, right? And they're coming to me because either they like my style of training, they really want to develop that way with me, or specifically for breath work they want to do. So my first goal is to get them to restore mechanics. So I don't pick a technique. I'm not like, oh, do this technique and that will drop you into a sympathetic state. Like, for example, we'll use the Wim Hof Method, and that'll get your adrenaline flowing and get you all amped up and ready for your session. I don't do that because I think that for me that's a hack. It's you are relying on you're manipulating the breath to make you feel better, to produce a performance. But the other side of that coin is as well, if your breathing is your weakness, then why would you want to bypass it? Why would you want to cheat it by utilizing a specific technique? So for me, I want to rehab the breath. I want to restore it. That's my first goal. And once I have their system trained, then you ask, well, what does it incorporate? So for respiratory warm-up, in the general warm-up phase of movement or skills training, I will bring in breath holding into the general warm-up phase. I'll bring in between 4 and 6 very strong breath holds. So for me, I like it through the nose, and I like holding the nose during the breath hold because it has a lot of benefits in terms of what happens up in the nose for your system as well. So they will breathe in, they will breathe out of the nose, they'll pinch and hold their nose, and then they might move with that to generate a higher metabolic load. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's in the general warm-up phase. Then they'll go off and they'll do all their power training, they'll do all their skills training or warm-up phase. And then to finish their warm-up, if it was pre-competition, I would get them to hyperventilate. I call it supraventilation, so breathe more than normally because it doesn't have a negative connotation to it. I get them to do it depends on the person, but between 5 and maybe 10, 15 breaths to dump CO2 out of their system. So now they're more fresh and ready to go from the first whistle or does that make sense?
Yeah, that's something I actually had wanted some clarification on, because I think that, I mean, this could be a whole talk in and of itself, but I do realize the need, like we talk about mental clarity and the slightly parasympathetic need for mental clarity. But what if your job is just, you have to amp your body up too? Like you have to have some adrenaline going to compete. Like you can't just devoid yourself of those things. And I think it's maybe slightly different for a team sport with more openness to it, where there's more things going on versus a sport where you're just tunneling. Like I worked with a swimmer who set an American record doing a Wim Hof style breathing before his races, because he's like, yes, oxygen. This is, and it's not like you have lots of things to be aware of. You are tunneled in on one feet to do basically. Well, swimming, you got to turn and, kick and then on top. But you know what I'm saying? So that's a question I'd always, and I love, by the way, how you said, breathe more than normal versus, I was actually thinking in my own mind, okay, what can I call this for, because if you say hyperventilate, it's like, what am I doing? This is bad. You don't want to have that. So
hyperventilation just means more than your metabolic needs, but it has a negative connotation because it comes from kind of the medical industry. But it comes from mainstream in that it's related to disease and dysfunction, right? Whereas this is, I think, supra maximal loading. That's where I got the idea, right? Supra maximal loading, more than 100% of your lift. So that's exactly what I'm doing. I don't care whether it's faster or just bigger. So whether it's it depends on the person. People will prefer a different style. So I get them to supra maximally ventilate.
Yeah, I was thinking too. So you mentioned adrenaline, because I always want to be able to take this back to what we're talking about now, nuts and bolts in the session. My mind tends to just go, and I want to make sure I bring it back. But you had mentioned adrenaline. Christian Thibodeau, a Canadian strength coach, has been on the show a few times, and in a recent episode, he was talking about how if we have too much adrenaline in our system, that's going to prolong our recovery times from the work. So I was just thinking to myself, okay, well, there's this balance, right? Like if it's an important competition and it's a really fast, it's a 400 or and I do have to tunnel, or even maybe a big lift. I'd imagine there's probably some of that before even a power, not even necessarily endurance. There's probably is adrenaline and various things. Perhaps, I'm not 100% sure. I don't necessarily see like Olympic lifters doing that before, or it's a lot of, there's always a calm state for sure. So there's probably a trade-off between what's happening aerobically and then the mind. And what do you think about that?
One of the pathways to secreting adrenaline is by breathing. So when you supraventilate, breathe more than your metabolic demand. So you blow off carbon dioxide. Okay, when you blow off carbon dioxide crosses the blood-brain barrier, and your brain registers that you're now breathing more than at rest. And your brain automatically goes, uh-oh, this is fight or flight, baby. This is the pathway that leads to fight or flight. So it's like bing, 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 bing. We gotta get prepped. So it automatically starts to generate adrenaline up there in the hypothalamus. Now, there is a difference between adrenaline being, in my opinion, this is just practice. I'm not a scientist, so I don't like necessarily talking about the inner workings of the body, because I'm not an expert in that, right? But in my mind, there's a difference between a conscious effort and a unregulated subconscious effort. For example, okay, let's just say a default breathing pattern of mine is to breathe heavy when I get stressed, okay? If I breathe heavy before I go out for competition, that is a conscious control of breath. I'm doing it on purpose. So it's almost like I have guide rails on my nervous system and on what I want to achieve. Versus I drink a can of Monster, and all my inner working starts going crazy, and I can't contain the hormones. I can't contain the effects that are happening on my body, because it's just it's subconsciously regulated. Does that kind of make sense?
The way I think about it is I always just think about this, like the human body is a miracle, and in its natural state, how much extra conscious forebrain manufactured stuff should we really be put? At the end of the day, none, right? Like you shouldn't have to do.
Yes.
Maybe this is more philosophical, but I don't think LeBron James or basketballs were Michael Jordan. I don't think they were doing all this extra conscious stuff. I mean, I know they're mentally, mentally, like the mental mindset and mastery and those things, but physiologically, I doubt the body in its own state. As elite athletes, oftentimes I think are doing things that they're not even conscious of. It's just
correct, like Michael sticking out his tongue, right?
Yes, exactly. I need to do a podcast
it will be
on
an
that.
example, and a lot of his mind games that he developed probably came out of just competition and out of life. There's nothing better than having life as a teacher, right?
Yes.
Whereas what we're trying to do is pick apart those processes and teach people skills that they can use, that their life isn't presenting them with the circumstances to develop them themselves. Like for me, I don't think cavemen needed to do breath training. I think because their environment was in line with the human system. In other words, their food was organic, grass-fed. Their air was clean and filtered because there was no industry. They got plenty of movement in through the day. They slept like a log at night. They went out with the sunlight went down. So their need for kind of restoring and rehabilitating their body is minimal. So the benefits where it comes into, I suppose, is just to get that extra out of performance. But the problem for us nowadays is that most of us are coming from a dysfunctional place in some part of our body, and we're either trying to hack that system with specialized techniques, or we need to put the time into training them.
Yeah, I would agree. We're oftentimes reaching for the top of the pyramid when that bottom is shaky and there's a lot of bricks missing because of our modern lifestyles and just everything that kind of goes into us now versus being a caveman, like you said. So you started session with, like you mentioned, like the nose breathing breath hold. And then that's for the purpose of like a diagnostic. And then also, so what is that giving to the session as well? Just that element. If it's just a typical gym session, strength, typical qualities you'd get in the gym.
Oh, so you're asking how would I train people in the gym, is it?
Well, what
is the question? Oh,
just clarifying outside of being a diagnostic, you mentioned that, a typical activity. And I do like, what you said. I like for this talk to be more about restoring than hacks, like you said. But what does that, outside of the breath holding diagnostic?
What I use with people typically in a gym?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that is a very open question, and it's because of the emotional states of people. What people don't realize is that breathing has a critical role to play in emotional balance and in processing emotions as well. So, for example, some people, you said your athlete did the Wim Hof Method before their event. And that's great because it worked for them and they're just the right technique for the right person. But there's some people that should not touch that method and go near it with a barge pole because emotionally it will imbalance them. Okay. And then there's other people. So that's kind of the Wim Hof on one end where it's big breathing and big rhythmical breathing combined with breath holding. On the other end, you do have the Buteyko where it is breath holding. Some people don't like that either, which is the nasty thing. So what I will do with people, if you're asking me, if somebody just said, Leo, I want a one-off session, give me a flavor of what you do, what do you do? And in terms of how would I integrate breathing into their session, I would, first of all, give them some biomechanical breathing. So I get them doing that breath wave and practicing that. And we might spend a minute or two trying to restore that if it needed to. Then they go off and do the normal warm-ups. If it's a weight session, then I'll teach them how to use their breath to create tension through the kinetic chain. So in other words, a strong pursed lip exhale. Yeah, I would use that. But then towards the end, I do like to bring in the breath holding towards the end because one, it helps to reset them into a more of a parasympathetic state and it helps to calm them down after a breathing session. So towards the end, it adds to conditioning without needing to flog the muscles, if that makes sense. And it also helps them to, if you graduate it down, it helps them to finish a session and feel fresh. if that makes sense.
Yeah. Based off your marathon experience, absolutely. You said something about creating tension, because that's something that's been interesting to me. It's like I had 2 questions left for you, but they keep adding on. So hopefully I can keep it's just like you take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I mean, not being a negative thing. I'm just saying I just keep thinking about. So that's something I've been thinking about a lot, is using the breath to create tension through the kinetic chain. I was just I spoke at a virtual now NSCA National Strength Conditioning regional seminar where they were talking about just that and breath techniques too. If you look at like elite athletes' faces when they're like doing a jump, you see the cheeks out, you see all this pressure and tension that's through the chain. I was just watching Darian Barr, a biomechanics and many things athletics mentor to me, was showing a video recently with it was Karsten Warholm, who recently set, I think, the world number 2 all time in the 400 hurdles. But it showed every time he would take a hurdle, compared to his competitors, you could see even, of course, he's a much more pale complexion, so maybe that's why you could see it more. But like, you could just see this, like the pressure through his system every time he would, in his thorax, every time he would take off over a hurdle. So could you just tell me a little bit about that, like teaching people to create tension? Because that's, I think, pressurization, I think, is so often not looked at as one of these methods of creating power. Could you just expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, martial arts have known it for centuries, if not thousands of years, right? And how to do that, and also how to vocalize it as well, which creates even more tension when you need it. First of all, to be able to create that tension through the chain, you have to be able to access the muscle. So again, we're going back to restoring those breathing mechanics, okay? Because if your diaphragm isn't moving well, if it's retracted and not moving well, then your ability to contract and move the pelvic floor is reduced as well. Because it all works together. That, as we all know, that intra-abdominal pressure, that cylinder works together, and it also works with the kinetic chains of the body. So if you look at the diaphragm is an external sphincter on the esophagus, right? So for the mouth, down into the throat, down into the stomach, it acts as an external sphincter, which means that as the diaphragm it squeezes in on the esophagus to prevent food passing into the stomach, and then it can open up as well when the diaphragm, when you are inhaling with the diaphragm, it will open up as well to allow more food pass through the esophagus. The diaphragm it's the only single muscle that sits horizontal to the whole body. So every vertical column of the kinetic chain passes through it. Whether you're looking at Thomas Myers, whether you're looking at all the superficial backline, deep backline, superficial and deep front lines, or any of the spiral lines, lateral lines, they all pass through the diaphragm at some level. And I think of them as columns of that kinetic chain. So as your diaphragm, as you inhale and exhale, you are either, from a top-down approach, you're either creating more tension through the chain, or you're releasing tension like a corkscrew. You're either tightening it and increasing that tension between the diaphragm and the feet, or you're loosening it and allowing some of that tension to dissipate, and with it goes power to dissipate. Okay, so once you can access the diaphragm, you can then use it to create more tension. Dr. John Douillard was actually quite well, he's not known that well. He wrote a book in the 90s on particularly Ayurvedic medicine and nose breathing as well. He trained a lot of elite tennis players. I know the forward was by Billie Jean King, and I know he trained Martina Navratilova, who was a very famous tennis player. And she's one of the longest serving professionals, and I think she won the highest amount of majors, for want of a better word, in tennis, right? But he trained a lot of elite tennis players, and he would say that you should, and this is going back to the 1990s, is that you should have an alternate step breathing pattern. So, for example, with swimming, when swimmers are training, and you correct me wrong, because obviously you're a swimming coach, but from my basics of swimming, you don't want somebody taking a unilateral breath stroke every day of training for swimming, because they're going to overdevelop some muscles on one side and underdevelop the other. Would that be accurate enough?
I was actually just a strength coach for swimmers, so I can't.
Okay.
That sounds right, though. Yeah, it sounds appropriate.
Well, as you turn your head to get air in the water, you're going to rotate more. Let's say you're turning your head to the right. You're going to rotate more through the right side of your body. You're going to have a higher elbow lift in order to get through in a front crawl. So you'll end up, and if you only turn to the right the whole time, I see this a lot with recreational swimmers, is that they develop an imbalance swimming stroke. Okay. So the same can happen with running. Is if you inhale only as your left foot hits the floor every single time, you create more tension through the left side and less tension through the right side of the kinetic chain. And according to Dr. Douillard, you will increase the likelihood of injury all the way up through that left side of the chain. And he saw a lot of knee injuries and hip injuries as a result of it.
Oh, that's really interesting.
So, yeah, I would look also in terms of creating tension in the kinetic chain, both in terms of maximal loading. Well, can you use your exhale for strength? Whether it's a punch, whether you want to go and produce a lot of force, or whether it's a sprint where you want to generate maximal force with as many strides as you can, where you're then pairing your exhale with your foot strike.
So with that, that's really interesting with the single leg thing, like the landing and breath on every leg. That actually makes me appreciate. I was just thinking about like bounding exercises, and I appreciate that bounding, you can't really bound without doing it every step. So maybe there's something pressure wise there I hadn't really thought of. But what do you do with that importance? Is there like a mindful element that you're using if people are doing like a lunge or even running that you're like that is in that you're putting in their mindset to be aware of in that context? And obviously the martial arts, like tons of stuff there.
Absolutely. Like martial arts, it becomes innate in the martial art. It is taught, maybe not openly as much as I would talk about it, but they know about the power of breathing for a long, long time. I'd be surprised if you had a sensei or a coach that wasn't aware that you use breathing to create and generate power. We'll be working with more of the subtleties. But for general population, for athletes, running is a great way. So I'll get them starting walking, and I get them just every time they take a step, initially, I get them say, okay, just like with swimming, you would say, okay, every third stroke, every fifth stroke, every seventh stroke. So you might extend the length of time of one breath matched to the stroke rate to develop better endurance and fitness qualities, right? So you would have a more efficient breathing system. But then if I was a sprinter, I would almost want to you could almost use your breath for power by using a shorter breath every couple of footfalls, maybe every 3 footfalls. Is what I would do. And it's just a matter of developing the rhythm. So literally when you're walking, hit your left thigh as you want to inhale on that left thigh, and alternate a left thigh slap with a right thigh slap. And that's how I begin to pattern it into people. And then once they got that rhythm, like with music, once they got that rhythm, that beat, then they stop the slap, then they try and integrate it into a jog, into a run, into a sprint. Until it just then becomes subconscious and innate to them.
Interesting. Yeah, I just think that's so cool how those things that are in the awareness field. So last question is, as our time's drawing short, I know I wanted to just get into just a couple methods on restoring. Like you said, not to have to rely on hacks and shortcuts. Not that I think those things are necessarily bad, but obviously we gotta get to that, like the base of it all, right? So just a couple, like you mentioned, getting the diaphragm working properly, some techniques. Like, what are just a couple things that to be aware of in terms of restoring the? I know there's obviously a lot of them, and we would have a 10-hour podcast, but just a couple things that can be really for that restoration.
Well, okay, even that's scientific backed and research backed. A very simple breathing technique is 4-6 breathing. Breathe in for 4 seconds. Exhale for 6 seconds. and repeat that for 2 minutes. So inhale, 2, 3, 4. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can repeat that for 2 minutes. It's been shown to set you more into a parasympathetic state, so take you out of that high stress state, and also open up the frontal lobe of the brain so that you can think more clearly. Because when you're stressed, that frontal lobe shuts down and you can't think as clearly. That's a beautiful, beautiful technique for helping people to drop into that state. From there, box breathing would be, you call it an advancement of that technique, which is beautiful. People can use that both. I think of it like an adaptogenic technique. So it can be used to help you to focus and become energized, for want of a better word, and also to calm and relax, depending on who you are and how you're using it. So box breathing comes from Navy SEALs. You're looking at it's called a box because you have an even count between inhale, hold at the top, exhale, hold at the bottom. So you pick a base number, let's say 4 seconds, in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4, and you repeat that box cycle. Again, 2 minutes is kind of appears to be a minimum threshold, but if you're really enjoying it and you want to really drop into deeper states, then maintain it then for even up to 10 minutes. If you find 4 seconds easy, then you can start to challenge yourself and progress yourself, move to 5, 6, 7, 8 second box. I find in around 7 seconds, if you can get to 7 seconds, then I tend to advance it to another technique again. Yeah, and it's beautiful because what it does is it also helps you to develop a little bit of CO2 tolerance because you got those breath holds and the control of the exhale in there. But it also helps you to develop your capacity because as you go up those base numbers, your ribs will begin to open more because you'll have to suck more air in order to hold the tempo, hold the pace. So there are 2 beautiful techniques that I use. I'll help use with people, particularly 4-6 I'll use in recovery. Box breathing I'll use as a nice calm way to get somebody focused. 4-6 again I'll use to help them to sleep better. Whereas the box breathing I might use more in the morning time, again to get them just more set up for the day and prepped for the day.
Awesome. So that case gets me thinking like the box breathing or more the prep breathing and the focus type element. Cause I think that doesn't that help like accuracy, like shooting accuracy, like focus, like those types of things?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's why, again, this is why breathing has become so popular. Like if you look at the All Blacks rugby team, if you look at Cristiano Ronaldo, who would be one of the most famous soccer players in the world, look and see what they're doing. You look at Novak Djokovic, the tennis player, is known for using the Wim Hof method. You look at Roger Federer, there was a couple of papers written on, or there's a paper written on him recently in terms of the way he uses his nose to breathe and how calm he remains. But a lot of people, whether it's intuitive or they've just picked it up from other means, they know that breathing will help to calm them down and to help them to focus. And that's now actually been shown in science, where you have a connection between your breathing rhythms and attention in the brain, as found in the locus coeruleus of the brain. And if you think of it from a heart rate point of view, your heart sits into the diaphragm. There's no space between the heart and the diaphragm. There's no gap. The pericardium of the heart actually attaches onto the diaphragm and spreads over the top of the diaphragm. So as you breathe faster, your heart rate beats faster. As you breathe slower, your heart rate beats slower. Your brain senses that. It automatically then calms down, opens up your thinking brain, and enables you to focus and place your attention on things for a longer period of time.
Oh, I love that. I love how I love how integrated it is. Like the heart, it's like right there. Okay, so last question, just quickly. I know like release techniques, like you mentioned, like manual therapy. I think just rubbing around the ribs, diaphragm area is pretty. People there's different techniques, but is there one that you find any that you find particularly effective, or things people can do? I know like RPR, be activated. There's that people a lot are familiar with that type of thing. Anything that you find helpful or particularly useful for the different types of restoration?
I would say get your hands and get feeling your ribs. So underneath the ribs, and breathe nice and calmly and lightly as you should be able to hook your. So a simple test is if your diaphragm is retracted or if it's working well, is especially lying down, is when you exhale, can you hook those fingers underneath your diaphragm and almost rub the insides of the rib. This has nothing got to do with how much body fat you have on you. You should be able to, because the tissue should be nice and supple. You should be able to feel under there. If that's quite tense or hard, I think of it like, is it, I say to my clients, is it rare? Is it like a rare steak? Is it a steak cooked rare, or is it well done? Is it tough and hard, or is it nice and supple? Vegetarians don't like me too much for that one, but that's how meat feels, right? That's how tissue feels. So I like to use that. And if it is hard, then there's millions of ways how to bring awareness into it. But I like to breathe nice and calmly and just play around in there. Is a nice, easy one to try and, manually just soften that tissue in there.
Cool.
Yeah, RPR is fantastic. Use it. They have a lot of good techniques. Same with NKT, neurokinetic therapy. They have a few different ones. Yoga tune-up, I have more of them. There's loads of them out there.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I've done the be activated and then the NKT. So I'm familiar. I'm just curious on your opinion. So last quick question, because you got this is for me personally very selfish, as you were talking about the things that are like, I guess, deficiencies or whatever. And I do think when I catch myself sometimes holding, and how does this differ from box breathing? Because I'm very good at the box breathing type stuff, great control there, but I'm a person who I'll hold my breath at the top. I think I have a lot of tension. I don't think I let it fall out very well. So the difference basically between a box breathing, like you're teaching box breathing, but also like for someone who might be a breath holder and not just let it fall, and that relaxing element. What are some thoughts there? Or
well, this is where I will call box breathing a specialized technique. You're doing it on purpose. For a reason, versus your subconscious natural breath rhythm. If you're holding your natural breathing rhythm, so we inhale either through the mouth or nose, but let's say you inhale and you hold at the top and then let it go, or if you inhale and you kind of purse your lips or you constrict your throat muscles to control your exhale, I have found that can have very serious emotional health consequences. So in other words, it's representative of you controlling your life, right? If you're controlling something and contracting something that should be a recoil, that should be just let go, well, how is that unfair to the rest of your life as well, right? Are you the type of person that what happens when control is taken out of your ability, right? If that's ingrained into your breath, that is the most basic process you have. So you will drop into, I have found anyway, is that people will drop into anxiety patterns and panic patterns very quickly. Those types of people that have that controlled exhale or that breath hold will drop into anxiety and panic patterns very quickly when control is taken from them in life, or when things become disorganized and they're not able to cope. Whereas if you can, even if you're that type of person inclined, if you can repattern that breath, right? Well, then when you lose control in life, or when life throws you a curveball, you can quite simply return to that breath to help to center you to then be able to think clearly and make a plan. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So for me, the biomechanics and the physiology, your body dictates what happens up there in the mind when the shitstorm comes, or when chaos ensues, right?
Yeah, I was trying that as you were talking. I was like, "Oh, this is great! I got to do this." Yeah, everyone knows more about me now since I'm explaining my breathing patterns and where the emotion come from. So I will be working on that, and
Nice.
I love that. Well, hey, I think that's about, man. I would love to. There's obviously, this is such a huge topic, and I've asked tons of questions, but I think that's the end of our time together. Man, Leo, thank you so much. I have a lot of things to work on. I'm sure all of us listening do as well, and I'm excited for the next time we get to talk. I'm sure I'll be following what you're doing. So where can people find you if they want to learn more about all this?
Yeah, sure. My on Instagram, my handle is @IamLeoDaniel. I have a website called innatestrength.com. That's innate-strength.com. And you'll find it there. I put all mainly my breathing stuff is what I do online. So I have for example, I have a 12-week project, which is a group training program, and it takes people through that restorative phase into a phase of training of breathing and teaches them how to apply it to sport. And I have a variety of sports and a mixture both from power to endurance in there and everything in between. But through the webinars, I coach you live how to apply, once it's trained, how to apply your breathing to sport. And then I have one-to-one coaching in that online too.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Leo. I really appreciate your time. I have so much to think about. So until next time, have a good one, man.
My absolute pleasure, Joel. Thank you for having me.
Oh man, that was such an expansive show. Thanks for tuning in. And I know my knowledge game on breathing and breath was definitely up there, and I hope yours was too. I'm sure it was. There's so much great stuff on that, and lots of stuff for me to continue on my own educational and coaching journey with. So before I get out of here, if you enjoyed the show and could leave us a rating or review on iTunes or Stitcher, whatever you're listening to, I'd really appreciate that, and it really helps us out, just spreading the message of this show to those people that would find it useful. Also wanted to give a shout out to our sponsor, simplyfaster.com. They've been a long time sponsor of this show, and we really appreciate them. All right, we'll see you guys next week.